Over the past couple of weeks, I've been watching a lot of Star Fox Zero videos. I've been catching up on what the narrative's been over the past couple of years, and I've called out how all of these people, Scott the Woz, Magnum Muscles, Neril, Some Call Me Johnny, just to name a few, have been like very hypocritical and ridiculous about the Star Fox IP over the past several years. And I've been very upfront about this. I've been calling these people out for like a long time in regards to them not being able to figure out Star Fox Zero's control scheme, how they, don't seem to know anything about Star Fox Command, how they glaze assault, how they try and like do all of these things to desperately try and downplay the IP. But one of the things that really dawned on me while I was watching these videos over and over and over again, I noticed just how they're still pretending as if Star Fox and F-Zero have not made a comeback. Because this has been the thing since Star Fox Zero has come out. Like, if you really think about it, the past decade, we've gotten a ton of Star Fox content. We got Star Fox Zero. We got Star Fox and Starlink. We got Star Fox 2. We got Star Fox and Smash Ultimate. We got the new one. We got Fox McCloud in the Mario movie. Like, obviously, the series has been on the verge of coming back for a very, very long time. Like, even when Star Fox Zero first came out, Miyamoto came out and he was just like, yeah, I'm definitely going to put more energy into producing the next major entry in the franchise. It was just erroneously believed by the general gaming YouTube community that Star Fox was a dead IP, that it was never going to come back, that Nintendo was never going to make a good one again, and that this would be it. This would be the end of the franchise. And it just kind of dawned on me just how common this is, because you're seeing this now with Metroid Prime 4. You're seeing a lot of people saying this is the end of Metroid. Nintendo doesn't care about it. They're never going to produce another one. And you're also seeing people saying we haven't gotten a new F-Zero game since GX, completely ignoring the Game Boy Advance titles that came out after F-Zero GX, completely ignoring, F-Zero 99. It's almost like it doesn't count. And this is the huge, massive double standard when it comes to these people. Because, like, if a game isn't given like the breath of the wild treatment, like it's almost treated like it doesn't exist. This has been like the pervasive thing for the past 10 years, is that people genuinely thought that Star Fox was a dead IP, that it was never going to have a resurgence and relevancy. And now we're getting a new one, and the same people are like just still bending over backwards to try and pretend that the series isn't on the verge of like, a major comeback. These guys, they fabricated out of whole cloth this narrative that like, Star Fox was nothing but remakes, okay? Ignoring the fact that Zero is not a remake, ignoring all the things we've gotten that are nothing like 64. Yeah, like now that we're getting an actual remake of Star Fox 64, hilariously enough, that's when these people are completely on board with it. Because these guys are fake fans. They are posers. They don't know what they're talking about. I actually, I watched the Scott the Woz video today, a couple of hours ago, and I was very, 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 very surprised and how it's just him sitting there going over how like game journals didn't like it like pre-release. Okay, he spends a very little time actually explaining what the game is, and he makes the very like basic mistake that a lot of people who criticize Star Fox Zero make, in that they claim this is a game that can be beaten in a couple of hours, which is not true, and is very obviously not true if you actually like spend any amount of time at all. Like, the fact that people seriously accuse Star Fox Zero of being short is just laughable to me, considering like how 64 is structured, considering what that game is like, considering like, that game's reputation for being a highly replayable game. Like, Zero did not have that kind of audience because the people reviewing the game were not fans of 64. They didn't know anything about Star Fox, and they don't know anything about the brand as a whole. And that's why we have this weird fan fiction, like alternate reality, where fans believe Star Fox is this brand that somehow inexplicably can't get new entries, cannot be successful, cannot like get new games, cannot like evolve the formula, cannot get remakes. Like again, it's interesting how determined the community is to continue to continue to pretend that Star Fox is a stagnant IP. Like we've just been getting the same game over and over again for 30 years. Okay. Lately, I've been seeing people argue that Star Fox 64 is a remake of the Super Nintendo game, which is like obviously retarded if you think about it for 2 seconds. But like, that's the level of like, of delusion we're dealing with here, right? Where people are straight up manufacturing controversies to try and drum up criticism for a game that they didn't play. Okay. Because 64 is nothing like the original, Zero is nothing like 64. Like these are completely different games that innovated and pushed the genre forward. And like there's just this inability to accept that. And I do think it's very similar to what like Zelda went through in the 2000s actually. Because if you don't remember, and I think if you're younger, you never saw this happen. Like for a long time, there was a narrative that Ocarina of Time was just a remake of A Link to the Past. Like the narrative being that like, well, you get three things and then there's a plot twist and then you get like more things and then you beat the game. It's like that's called like a typical structure. Okay, that's a formula. Okay, that's not like what the game is. Okay, the idea that like Ocarina of Time is like a remake of A Link to the Past is like a completely wrong statement that like only can only be believed by people who never actually played the game. Okay, you have to be like spoony tier, lazy, and retarded to like come up with a narrative like that. But that was the mindset that like PlayStation owners were in the 90s. That's how they downplayed Ocarina of Time while glazing shit like MGS, which was way more similar to like Metal Gear 1 and 2 than like a lot of people would have liked to admit. Like this is the reality of just how people approach downplaying Nintendo games. Like, if a Nintendo game has like a similar plot structure or a vibe similar to like another Nintendo game, it's classified as a remake, even though the term doesn't really apply. Okay, because we've seen a lot of people like slap the term remake onto Zero when it's nothing like 64 at all, while like trying to act as if like the new one is some like new exciting thing when that's the remake. Like that's it's things like this that make you not take the general gaming community seriously because if they're straight up like fabricating narratives like this, like misappropriating games, like putting them in genres where they don't belong. I remember when people tried to say that like Zelda was an RPG, specifically so they could try and classify it as being like not as good as Baldur's Gate because it doesn't have dialogue options or like party members or like dialogue choices or anything like that. Like again, we've seen like a lot of this kind of like misrepresentation of classic Nintendo IPs for a long time, and it really feels as if Star Fox very possibly has gotten the worst of it over the past like 30 years because I've never seen like a community that's so determined to pretend that Star Fox 64 is constantly getting remade while at the same time rejecting everything the series tries after it. Because, Adventures was a pretty solid game. Assault was pretty solid. Command, I think, having come back to it now, I think it's quite a bit better than most people give it credit for. Zero was fantastic, one of the best games ever made, in my opinion. But like at the end of the day, like the one that became popular with normies was 64. And so that's the one that people always go back to. And that's the one that people use that they weaponize against other Star Fox games. Like similar to how we went through like the GameCube era of Zelda games being told that like they're never going to be better than Ocarina of Time. They're just rehashes of Ocarina of Time. It's the same game again. Like 64 is being Star Fox is going through like that same mindset of just people acting like these games don't matter simply because they have superficial similarities to older games in the same franchise. Like it's disgusting. Okay. it doesn't make any sense at all. And it's high time that we really do address this and point this out, because it's just downright ridiculous how like how how much effort Nintendo has put into Star Fox over the years, how many like games it's gotten, and like how popular it's remained, and yet like we're still in this like mindset in the community that the franchise is on the verge of failing. It's something that we absolutely have to speak out against and call out, because this is a really good example of just how delusional and out of touch the Nintendo community actually is. Like Star Fox Zero, that game and its reception, its control scheme, that's what gave us the new game, essentially. Like, you're complaining and bitching about Star Fox Zero led to Nintendo to remaking Star Fox 64 again, like an actual remake, not a sequel. So with that in mind, like I just can't take you seriously. Like, you can't criticize a game for being a remake and then turn around and start glazing like the actual remake. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. Like, the more stunts you pull like this, like the less credibility you're gonna have in the sphere. And I think one of the things that's gonna change now that like Star Fox is back in vogue is that you're gonna have more motherfuckers like me, people who have played Star Fox Zero more than you, who know Star Fox Zero better than you, who can use the controls better than you, will tell you like what actually happened with Star Fox Zero. In that it was a game that was too high skill for general audience. It was simply too difficult. All these complaints about the controls, it's essentially a mask to hide the fact that like that they didn't get good and that they don't have the skills to fucking play it. Like, that's really all it comes down to, is that they didn't get good and they couldn't really play Star Fox Zero properly. That's all any of this comes down to. Every single gaming YouTuber is like this. Every single gaming YouTuber who criticized Star Fox Zero is Dark Side Phil in this situation. Like, all of them completely failed to understand just how innovative and forward thinking Star Fox Zero really was. And you will see Star Fox make a glorious return on the Switch 2. Like, the Switch 2 one is very possibly it is very possible that this will be the best selling title in the series, that it's going to be a huge phenomenon, it's going to be a huge deal. And I feel like there's not going to be anything you can do to stop it this time, because this is the first Star Fox release that's coming out post video game journal. Okay, Nintendo has an online presence. They have the Nintendo Direct format. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, something like Star Fox Zero, where the game journals in 2014 were already running hit pieces on like how broken the controls were because their talent was hacked. Like, that's never going to be allowed to happen again. And it's high time we understood what actually happened with Star Fox Zero and why we've never seen anything like it happen again. It wasn't because the game was bad or it was broken. Like, what happened was that game journals were damage controlling the game from the moment it was unveiled to them behind closed doors at E3 2014, and they memed this idea that the game was broken and unplayable to the mainstream. And like, people are willing to eat up gaming journalism bullshit as long as it's shitting on Nintendo. That's like the long and short of it, really, is that people made their minds up about this game long before it actually came out. And even today, you still see them like try and pretend that like this was a Star Fox Zero was a bad game, or that it was underwhelming, or that like they couldn't figure out the controls. Like, it's a skill issue, and that's the long and short of it, is that it was a skill issue. And we are going to see over time this game like start to appreciate and start developing like a more dedicated hardcore fan base. That's the funny thing about this release, is that now that there's no motivation to continue like downplaying Star Fox Zero and the Wii U, we are going to see more people start to celebrate its accomplishments and like how innovative it actually was. What a technically demanding game it was, how it stomped the shit out of like every Ace Combat game, and how it was just like this huge step forward for the franchise. I imagine, how visually gorgeous it was. This is something I've noticed too, is like how much better Star Fox Zero looks than the new one, actually. I remember when people were saying Star Fox Zero looked bad. So when we all take this into consideration, when we all think about what's happened, like gaming journals like successfully downplayed Star Fox Zero when it came out, artificially created this narrative that the IP was completely dead because of this release, and then they're like pretending to be excited about the franchise again when Nintendo just puts out another remake of 64. Right? It's just embarrassing at this point. Like these guys don't know anything about Star Fox. They don't play Star Fox games. They're not Star Fox fans, and we have to like address that. Like we really do have to point that out. Is that like how many of these games have these people played really? Honestly, like what are their credentials? You know what I mean? Like I was seeing like I mentioned earlier how I was watching like Scott the Woz earlier today, and he was trying to tell me that like, oh man, Star Fox and Super Nintendo, oh that was a technical marvel, and Zero was a huge disappointment visually in comparison. And I was just like, bro, you're like 25. You were not old enough to experience Star Fox on Super Nintendo when it came out. And I think that's like a really good example of where we're at as a society when it comes to like these social media gamers, is just how they want to pretend as if they're there, they were with it, by just regurgitating like articles and headlines from gaming journalists from like 30 years ago. Okay. Like Star Fox Zero, if you actually play it, is a fantastic game. The problem is that the vast majority of the audience has never played the game, has no intention of ever playing the game, has no intention of ever going back to the game. And like the simple fact of the matter is like it's more convenient for them to pretend as if the game is just this huge, massive misstep for Nintendo, as opposed to admitting that they were wrong about the game and that they need to reevaluate. Like that's kind of where we're at now, in that these people will do whatever it takes for the clicks. They'll do whatever it takes for the attention. They'll do whatever. They'll say whatever it takes to get like people on board with to watch their videos. Like it's not genuine. It's not honest, and it is very much out of touch with like actual fan opinions. And I do think like this remake hopefully will put an end to a lot of this nonsense. I hope Star Fox like has a completely revitalized franchise after this. I hope we get like new games regularly, and I hope in time that people grow to appreciate Star Fox Zero and Star Fox Command for what they are. But like, it's not going to come from the gaming journos. It's not going to come from like the YouTubers, because they are going to stick by their guns and do everything they possibly can to continue this farce that like Star Fox is a dead, struggling IP, or that they're gonna like try and say Zero is like the worst thing ever. They're gonna try and keep saying the Wii U is a failure of a console, and like more and more it becomes obvious that that's not actually true. Like more and more people are realizing just how successful the Wii U and Star Fox Zero actually were.